Hello world of YouTube and welcome to my Blink-182 Discography review. This is part 1 of the 90s. If you'd like to skip ahead to part 2, the 2000s, where I talk about their 3 albums that came out in that decade. The albums Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, their self-titled release, and their album Neighborhoods. Click the door fedora. Technically it's not a door anymore, but it's still the door fedora to you and me. Or if you're a long-time follower of me, to you. But to me all the time. I'm not changing the name. Even though this is a door, this is not a normal door. It has no knob. This little string, I don't even know if you can see this, so if you can't, this little string is the knob. That's how you open the door. It's a badass door. But anyway, Blink-182 Discography review. This is part 1. In this part I'm going to be covering their demo album Buddha, their album Cheshire Cat, their EP They Came to Conquer Uranus, and their albums Dude Ranch and Enema of the State. Now if you've never listened to Blink-182, they're like one of the poppiest, or one of the first overly poppy pop-punk bands. They started off similarly to Green Day, a little bit of snottiness with that edge. You have the contrast in vocals of Mark Hoppus's kind of more, not normal sounding, but in comparison to Tom DeLonge, normal sounding vocals. And his fairly hooky bass lines with Tom DeLonge's snotty, snooty, bratty tone to his voice with a lot of melody in his guitars as well as his vocals. He's kind of the they kind of have a good contrast vocal-wise, and they're always backed by a fantastic drummer. They originally had Scott Rayner on the drums, but then later on they got Travis Barker, who I'm not going to say who's better. I'm more of a Travis guy, just because I like his other work that I've heard him do. But Scott's not bad either. I'll definitely be complimenting the drums a lot on these releases. And kind of like my Green Day review, this may start off a little bit slow, because they don't really start to adapt their sound until up at the midpoint in their career. But I'll still want to talk about these early releases, so why don't we go ahead and get started, shall we? Now, the band had a few demos before this one, but the first album, or I guess the first demo or their only demo that got really popular and was re-released on CD was Buddha. Buddha, and a majority of these tracks from Buddha were put on their first major release, Cheshire Cat, which I'll talk about next. But this release is standard demo fare, fairly unproduced, very rough cut tracks, and it shows kind of Blink's style. You have the faster tracks like Toast and Bananas, and the softer tracks or not the softer tracks, but the more mid-tempo paced tracks like Transvestite and 21 Days. And the instrumentation's fairly straightforward, typical Blink fare. You have lots of chords on the bass and the guitar, and some really good drums from Scott, who is the drummer at this point in the band. And really, I mean, aside from the rough sound and the way Tom sounds on the vocals, this album's fairly standard Blink fare. And really, the only complaint about it is the way Tom sounds vocally. He sounds very snotty and snooty, and there's not as much of that poppy element. Like, they haven't reached the pop element that doesn't come until till the midpoint of the career, the part of the career that I'm used to. So it was kind of nice to hear some of these more edgier sounding stuff. I mean, it's not, hardcore punk, but I mean, in terms of their typical fare, I'd compare it to the Green Day stuff. I wasn't used to the early Green Day sound. I wasn't used to the early Blink. It's not my favorite thing they've done, but it's not terrible. If you like stuff along these lines, you're gonna like this. If you can find Buddha, I'd suggest, I guess getting the few songs that aren't on Cheshire Cat, because, I mean, even in terms of Cheshire Cat standards, which wasn't that heavily produced of an album, this is fairly rough. Rough cuts of stuff. The band plays alright. It's typical Blink fare. There's not a whole lot I can say that I wouldn't say for Cheshire Cat, so I guess I'll save some of the other stuff I had to say for that, and really I don't have that much to say for that either, so let's just go ahead and strum along here. I kind of like the way that they do what they normally do, which is break up these almost monotonous, fast-paced, quick bursts of energy with the slower, softer pace, not softer, but slower paced stuff like 21 Days and Transvestite. Yeah. That's pretty much it. My favorite track is It's probably Strings. Strings is good. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to Cheshire Cat, shall we? Yeah. Now, the first album they released was called Cheshire Cat, which was released back in 1994, and, it's a lot like Buddha. I mean, some of the tracks from Buddha, like I stated on there, are on here, and really, this is along the same lines of Buddha in terms of production and sound. They added some, they have some tracks on here that, kind of go forward to Dude Ranch, because Dude Ranch is kind of an album that focuses a lot more on hooky choruses, and tracks like Eminem's are a lot like that. And Eminem's is actually probably my favorite track because it's not a Tom track. I'm not saying Tom dominates this album, but any moment he's on, I just don't really dig it on this release. He really starts to find his niche as a vocalist next album. But I mean, this album, great. You know, the band still plays well. They still write hooky songs. It's another good pop-punk release. I don't really have too much to say on Cheshire Cat. It's kind of the forgettable album to me, because, I mean, it's not that hooky. The instrumentation is nothing new or nothing special for them, and I didn't get into them through this album, so it has no nostalgia hold for me. But, I mean, in terms of an album sound, I mean, in terms of, aside from the kind of low-quality production, it's still pretty good, you know, pretty solid pop-punk release. Got some good guitar lines, some good bass lines, and just all-around great drum work. Like I said, I wouldn't really have too much to say for these early releases, because while I don't hate them, I don't have too much to say, because they're not... The Blink album's one that I know, like, that I hold dear, and they're just kind of standard fare for pop-punk. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I apologize if you wanted some context in these parts of the review, but honestly, if you listen to Buddha and Cheshire Cat, there's not much of a difference within the band. Yeah. Let's talk about an EP. Shall we? We shall. Now, the next thing they released was an EP called They Came to Conquer Uranus, which I guess should signify the beginning of a more familiar sounding Blink, especially with the opening track Wrecked Him. It just kind of sounds like a slice out of that Dude Ranch, Enema of the State sound. It's 3 tracks that are a good transitional piece for the band. They're adding more harmony to it. They're trying to get a bigger sound with little subtleties, like the drum work is a little bit different, and really it's alright. This short little interlude, I guess, of a review. If you can find it and you're a diehard Blink fan, I'd suggest it. I'd actually suggest if you're wanting like the smallest sliver of a Blink sound that you can get, because there's literally 3 songs. Start with this. If you want to start with the bare minimum for Blink, start with this. It's got a lot of that production quality of the previous releases, with the sound bridging forward to their really, really popular sound. So, I suggest starting with this. It's not bad at all. I'll actually include a playlist of these 3 tracks, because it's 3 songs, so why not? I don't have too much more to say that I won't say in the next part, so let's talk about Dude Ranch now, shall we? Now, the next thing they released was an album called Dude Ranch that came out in 1997, and this is probably my second favorite Blink album. It's my favorite with Scott as the drummer. So the last one was Scott as the drummer. He left, or he was kicked out of the band because of drama within it and all that bullshit. But they kicked him out because he was an alcoholic, essentially. And they talk about that in a later track on another album that I'm not actually going to talk about because it's a live album, and I don't really do that much around here. Anyway, Dude Ranch. The reason why I love this album so much is because, in terms of albums, this is a good starting point. It has some aspects of the older releases in songs like Boring, while forging forward with their sound with songs like Damn It. Damn It has an extremely hooky chorus, and is just a fantastic album. The whole album is, not just that song. That song is great. But I love this album. The guitars sound really crisp, and the chords are really memorable in some of these tracks. The bass lines are really a good backbeat, and the drums are fantastic. Scott does a really good job on his fills, and he adds a lot of that subtle variety in such what seems like such a small kit. And they have these really just random sections like this, like at the end of Boring. But this album is great. They do a really good job of separating the chaos in tracks like Boring and with tracks like Dick Lips and Damn It and stuff. I mean, they have a good balance of the two, the melody with the edge. This is how you make modern pop punk. I'm gonna call it modern pop punk because I know some people don't like this group, and I know they're not like the most traditional, or they're probably one of the more popular pop punk groups, which I will agree with that. But this is how you make that style of pop punk well. Just fantastic musicianship, fantastic songs, lyrics, typical pop punk fare. I haven't talked about it really because it's either really emotional or really snotty. But yeah, this is a great album. A really, really great album. Start to finish, fantastic work. The production is really ramped up. They sound a lot better. And yeah, I really recommend this release to start off as an album, as a solid album to start off with. This is the one to go with because you can transition kind of well into the next release, and you can still regress back to the older releases fairly easily. And like I stated before, Tom kind of is starting to find his niche and has crafted it a bit. As a vocalist, he doesn't sound as annoying to me on this release. I made this because the production's gotten better and the musicianship is better, but I much prefer this release to the earlier stuff. It sounds a lot better, and I guess for a note for Scott to go out on, this is a good one. Like I said, he's not a bad drummer. He's definitely not a bad drummer. He adds a lot of the same nuances that Travis does to the band now. He's just less technical about it. Like, Travis does some fairly technical work, but I'll talk about that when I normally do. But my favorite track, I don't know, probably Damn It, just because Damn It is that one Blink song that I could listen to for days. It's so catchy and so just good. And it's one of the first Blink songs I think everyone has ever heard, because it's such a big song, so it has that nostalgic factor to me. But yeah, I love this album. It's great. Fantastic work. Blink did a really good job with it. And yeah, so kudos to them. Let's talk about one more album in this part, shall we, before we move on to the 2000s. Now, the last album they released was called Enema of the State, which was released back in 1999, and this is probably the seminal Blink-182 album. A lot of you guys probably have this release if you're a Blink-182 fan, and it's a great album. It's popular for a reason. I mean, the choruses are extremely poppy, like Aliens Exist and All the Small Things and Adam's Song, and even the Party Song, which, I mean, the Party Song and Aliens Exist are the better of the more faster paced tracks, but like the drum line on the Party Song is really awesome. You have this introduction to this really, really soft track in Adam's Song, which is this very depressing, melancholy track about suicide, about someone killing themselves, and it's a downer track. But that's kind of the thing with them. They start to really become more mature, because they're very snooty and very, very bratty still in the music on some of it, but they start to try to be more serious, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sorry, the phone just went off there, but there's nothing wrong with that. They were trying to mature a bit, and they don't do it too much on this release, so I do like that it has a good balance between the maturity and the immaturity. The instrumentation is still solid. This is the introduction to Travis Barker, who does a great job on the drums. I like Travis's work. And, yeah, it's pretty much just a poppier dude ranch. It's not as punk-driven. There are still a lot of these tracks that are very faster pace and stuff, but this album overall just seems more gearing more towards the poppier side of pop punk. So I mean, I don't hate this release. It's not my favorite. It's probably tied for third favorite. So yeah, I hope you dug this review. I know I started off kind of slow, but I stated it's going to be kind of slow at first because until you hit this point, they don't really change much as a band. They don't really start to do anything with their sound until about now. And yeah, I'll have a lot more to say in the next part, but I do enjoy these releases, I do enjoy this band, and I hope you enjoyed, again, this review. My favorite song on this album is probably a party song. Either the party song or Aliens Exist. So one of those will be linked below, along with all my other favorite songs, so that way if you've never listened to Blink, you can get some little snippets with my favorite tracks. And if you'd like to go to part 2, like I said before, click the Dorfadora, or the first link in the under thingy. And with What's My Age again, I will bid you guys farewell. If you do not join me in part 2, you guys have good days, lives, and situations. I'll see you another day. But if you do join me in part 2, I'll see you guys in the 2000s with Blink-182. No man in a Metallica shirt should ever do this.